All right, welcome back to the boss's office because it's lonely at the top, but it doesn't have to be. Today, we're talking about something every business owner, every executive, every leader deals with, and that's managing people. And let's be honest, nobody really teaches you how to do it, right? You start a business, you grow a team, and suddenly you're expected to lead personalities, solve problems, navigate conflict, and somehow keep everyone motivated, all while trying to grow the company. This episode is brought to you by Boss Mortgage. If you're looking to buy, refinance, or just want to understand your options in today's market, we've got your back. We're licensed in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, California, Arizona, Montana, and Colorado. Visit bossmortgage.com to learn more. NMLS 2547821, Equal Housing Lender. Our guest today is Bill Wilson, and he has spent the majority of his career doing exactly that. He's worked with major companies like Conoco, Chevron, DuPont, spent over a decade as an EAP working directly with employees and leadership. He's been involved in company turnarounds, and before you ask, no, not the hostile takeovers. Not the kick in the door kind, although that would make for some pretty great stories, and I imagine we'll have some pretty great stories today. He's also worked with Mercer Consulting, advising both employers and healthcare providers on behavioral health. And academically, I hope I got this right. Correct me if I'm wrong. A doctorate in public health, a master's in public health, and a master's in clinical psychology. Well, today we're diving into what it actually means to lead, how to direct without being a jerk, why your employees are not your family, and how to get the absolute best of your team by being firm, fair, and clear. So let's get into it. Bill, why do so many leaders struggle with managing people?
Well, I think you already mentioned part of the issue is that there are some expectations that we have of managers that are unrealistic given the training they get to take up those roles. Unfortunately, a lot of people get promoted because they're very good at doing something, which isn't necessarily managing employees. And then they get promoted into roles in which they have to oversee employees, and they'd rather do anything than do that, especially if it requires monitoring their performance and directing them into how to take up their roles. What I would say is that a lot of people who are in the role of manager do not have the training, actually the personality for taking up that role. And I'll give you an example. I worked for DuPont for years in their corporate EAP. And one of the things that DuPont did for probably 180 years was they took chemists and engineers right out of school, and then they made them into employees who covered all the roles that exist in a large organization, including HR. And
So you've got a chemist running HR.
Yes. So you have people that have fundamentally no orientation towards dealing with people, and in many cases don't even like people, who are put in the role of having to manage people.
And what would you say is some of the most common mistakes are that new leaders make?
I think one of the most common issues is that employees don't need attention. So in highly functioning organizations, employees are, they have job descriptions, and the job descriptions are good job descriptions, and there are not good job descriptions. But if you have a good job description, then the employee and the manager both know what the person's role is in the organization, and it should be measurable. It should be easy for the manager to say you're either doing these things well or you're not doing them well, and should be able to then address the employee's performance. But as I said, if you're loath to deal with employees and how they're not doing their job according to the job description, then you avoid doing that.
Right.
And so one of the biggest problems I encountered, in my 12 years of doing corporate EAP work for Conoco, Chevron, and DuPont was that by and large, where there were difficulties with employees, that the problems had been known for a long time and had been unaddressed. And then finally, when it got so bad that things need to be addressed, like, well, we're just going to have to fire the employee. That unfortunately, in many cases, that didn't need to happen had the employee's performance been addressed differently and sooner. Absolutely. And that's a great deal of what I did, is just saying, here are behaviors which will stand you in good stead as you manage employees. And here are behaviors you can engage in as a manager that will fundamentally get in the way of this employee doing a good job and you're feeling comfortable with them. So, one of the things that Randy mentioned earlier is this notion that I need to be liked by my employees. And that's completely and totally irrelevant. What you need is employees who are willing to do what you have asked them to do. And, when I mentioned a good job description allows the manager and the employee to have task agreement. And if there isn't task agreement, then what is the employee going to do? What do you think? Whatever they want. Yeah, whatever they think is right. And then if I'm not monitoring their performance, then they'll continue to think that what they're doing is correct. So it takes a good job description, which allows task agreement, and then me as a manager monitoring towards that. And so what do we know about employee behaviors? I mean, we have a lot of data, a lot of studies. Employees' performance that goes unmonitored drifts into what?
Chaos, I imagine.
Yeah, Rocky just mentioned it. They begin to do what they think is right or what they want to. Right. So the monitoring part. Well, some employers, I should say, have systems which are quite good at monitoring the performance of employees. But still, where those systems can fall down is if the manager isn't willing to take the data that's been collected, the information that's available to the manager, and address the employee with the information and say, hey, you're doing well here, and this is where you need some work. And so there are lots of supervision models. Well, I think one of the most current ones is strengths-based supervision, where you use an employee's strengths to address some of their weaknesses, some of their challenges. Yeah.
So moving on to the next segment, and
Sure.
this is something that a lot of people don't feel comfortable enough to say out loud.
Sure.
And we're not talking about nepotism in the workplace. We're talking about the fact that your employees are not your family. So let's talk about why this mindset actually hurts companies, where leaders go wrong trying to be liked. We've already mentioned that.
Sure.
And the difference between caring about employees versus being emotionally entangled. So why is "we're a family" dangerous language?
Well, how many highly functioning families do you know?
Oh, we'll treat you like family here at
we'll
the
treat
boss's
you like
office.
family. That is, we'll abuse you and tell you and shame you and tell you you're not doing a good job. What we care about is an employee's performance, and we want them to bring their best selves to work. What I mean by that is everybody wants to come and do a good job, and they like to be acknowledged for doing a good job. And they have a level of creativity which they can bring to bear in their work. And if we have devised systems which do not acknowledge their creativity and their contributions to the workplace, and we ignore them and we just don't pay attention to them, but we expect them to, especially if we use the language, we're all a family, we care about each other, until, it's like George Carlin used to say about God, I love you and I care about you. You're the best thing in my life, unless you break one of these 10 things, and then you're going to hell forever. So the problem is that you're not a family. When you think about the things that families do, we don't do that with employees. And so that fundamentally is an approach that gets in the way of the employee Because what can you do if you're a family member? Well, you can get away with some stuff. You can skate. They love me. They have
Sure.
to put up with me, right?
What are they going to do? Kick me out of the family?
Yeah, what are they going to do? Kick me out of the family? Yeah. I was at DuPont when they had the first layoff in their 200-year history. First layoff. And people were profoundly pissed.
Oh, I can imagine.
They were angry. We're talking about people that had been hired out of college, had worked for the company for 20, 25 years, and had been told all along that we're a family. You're part of this family till you die. We will take care of you and your family members, by way of providing you comprehensive insurance coverage, a nice retirement. And so from the time we hire you to the time you die, you and your family are taken care of, until they got into financial troubles. And then they had to have a layoff.
Mm-hmm.
And people were angry, and rightfully so, because they'd believed in something which is not true, and especially if a company gets into trouble financially.
Right.
I mean, it's meant well, right? Like it might not be the right thing to say, but it comes from the right place. Like we want to, we like you, we enjoy being around you, we want you to be part of our team. Maybe. I mean,
So think about it this way, it's sort of a marketing ploy for companies, right? We'll take care of you from hiring to death. So another way to put that is we have a comprehensive benefits package, which is competitive. Yeah, you could say that without saying, hey, we love you and you're part of a big family now, and we're going to take care of you always. Yeah.
So what's the right balance between empathy and accountability when we're talking about family?
Yeah. So when do I address employees? When I'm looking at their performance, and so there are regular times to do that, like an annual evaluation or quarterly
Sure.
reviews or whatever. And at that time, I should be giving all kinds of good feedback that are useful for the employee, because I don't know what the figures are now, but to hire and train an employee is exceedingly expensive. So, for example, one of the things that happened when I was at Chevron, we'd have employees that needed to go overseas with their families.
Yeah.
So they needed to be overseas and doing work over there. And so they would take the employee who'd done a good job with his family, say, out of Virginia, and then they'd send them to Saudi Arabia. So different cultures, different lifestyle, different climate. Nobody had done any work looking at whether the family was in condition to be transferred over there. So a premature repatriation at that time, and this was almost 30 years ago, was about $250,000 cost to the company.
Mm.
So this idea that we shouldn't look at employees and we should and basically it was, you'll be okay. You and your family will be okay. We'll give you everything you need. Well, they can't provide the same kind of school systems, the same shopping, a lot of the things that people would expect to have. So it's a fib, it's marketing. And, but to get back to the question, what is that balance? Well, the only time we want to address an employee's behavior is in terms of performance. So if we know that somebody's going through a divorce, it's easy you might hear that from somebody else or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. Do we go to them and try to make things better for them in terms of the difficulty that they're experiencing at home? The answer is no. The answer is, if whatever they're experiencing at home gets in the way of their performance at work, then what we should do is say, I still expect your performance, to be good. And, we have an EAP that we refer to. Most companies have access to an EAP now.
Mm-hmm.
But what we're going to address is your performance. The personal problems, those are going to be addressed by people who are professionals. Because guess what? I'm not a professional. And the decisions I make about some problem that someone is having, some personal problem, whether it's divorce, child problems, health problems. There are all sorts of benefits that the company has put in place to help the employee deal with those, not the manager. The manager's job is to identify performance problems and then help the employee get the assistance that they need for the other stuff.
So like a lot of people have small businesses.
And that sounds cold, doesn't it? Doesn't
It
that sound
sounds
cold?
hardcore, Bill.
Yeah, it
Yes,
sounds.
in a small corporation, or small
Yeah.
business, you have much fewer resources than you would have in a larger
Sure,
business. And
sure.
you're also a lot closer to the people because you spend more time with them.
You interact with them on a daily basis. Yeah.
So, but the line is the same.
Thus the danger.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or maybe even more so.
Well, yeah.
I mean,
Right.
mean that you separate.
Yeah. Think about it this way. The employees work the best for themselves and for their employers when they're clear about what the work is, they get good feedback about the work, and they respect the people who they're working for. And so,
He makes it sound so much easier than it really is. I mean,
yeah.
can you?
It's so much easier to get involved with them personally. Than it is,
Absolutely.
yeah, to hold the line and not do that. Yeah.
Well,
So can they still like you? Yeah, they can still like you. But what's more important than that? Like, you want them to respect you.
That's right.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got to since we are being direct,
Yes.
and we are talking about difficult things. 2 questions for you.
Sure.
Can you still care for someone, or can you care about someone and still fire them?
Absolutely.
Okay, well, that one was easy.
Yeah. Do you want me to tell you why?
Yes.
Yeah, because sometimes it becomes clear after a while that this role in your organization is not a good fit for that person. It doesn't match up. What your needs are as an organization don't match up with the skill set. And in some cases, when that mismatch occurs, there's training that can go on. I mean, legitimate attempts to help the employee take up that role successfully. Because after all, that's what a manager is really all about, is making sure that people can be creative, work hard, and have the resources to do their job properly. So once all that has occurred and it's obvious that this person, for whatever reason, can't pull the load that they're expected to, then it's good for the organization and it's good for the person to cut them loose. Yeah, help them go on to the next thing.
That's right.
So, and I mentioned the layoff that we had at DuPont, right?
Yes.
So part of what went on was I was involved in outsourcing these people. They were angry, they're upset, It's like, I've been lied to, I've been betrayed. So we kept really great data, and about 60% of the people left and found jobs at which they were making more money and by their own voices were happier.
Mm.
Yeah. So this worst thing that ever happened to them turned out to be a good thing for them. Now, what happened to the other 40%? They remained angry and resentful and held on. They were not ever going to let it go. I've been betrayed.
Right. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about how we can be direct, how we can be firm and fair, right? But how we can be direct without being a jerk, because sometimes being direct is, oh, you're being insensitive. And the truth, when you hear the term, the truth hurts, the truth really does hurt. But talk to us about, some leaders and some people who are listening who maybe tend to avoid those hard conversations. How can we be more direct without being a jerk and see results from that communication?
Well, I think you and I have had this discussion before, but what's really important when communicating with employees or your husband or wife, or your clarity and brevity. So what do I mean by that? You want to be clear and you want to be brief. So if you're anxious about your performance and whether they're going to like you, what I've discovered that most watching managers, they say, I'll sit here with you while you terminate this employee. They spend, 500 or 1,000 words getting around to you're gone.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because, you know, you're not doing a good job and this isn't a good fit and it doesn't seem like you're trying. Yeah.
So is it better to, I mean, I guess where's the line between being a jerk or being too soft?
Well, somehow being direct and being clear has gotten a bad name. Yeah. You know, that somehow if somebody has hurt feelings, and believe me, if you're getting terminated, there's some narcissistic injury there. Yeah. That's okay. Yeah. Think about it this way. Can you have a divorce without somebody feeling bad? Well, I know people try it, and it sure is ugly.
even the most amicable of divorces, there's still narcissistic injury.
Yes, there still is going to be a little bit of injury. Yeah. Yeah. Yesterday you were nice to me, and you've been nice to me all along. Yeah. So what I'd say about that, so have we been monitoring their performance, or have we been avoiding that? Because if we've been avoiding it, then there's going to be shock and awe and surprise and what? But so the goal here is the sooner that we have information about performance, the sooner that we address it. And the longer we wait, the more difficult it is and the more of a surprise it is. So if we have an annual evaluation only and that's it, then once a year they hear, you know, you've been friendly to me all year. Now you're telling me I'm doing a bad job? Well, it's a surprise. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the more lack of clarity there is, the more room for disagreement about what task is, what you're expecting of me. Yeah, the more room there's going to be for hard feelings.
Leave no room for ambiguity.
But yeah, there's no need to. Yeah. I mean, I operate as a manager best when I know what I'm supposed to be managing you to, right? If I'm just going, hey, get in there and do your job, and then, you know, we'll see how it goes.
Yeah, we trust that you're going to do a great job.
Yeah.
We hired you, you're going to do
I
great.
hired you, yeah.
And then
Right.
6 months later, wow, you haven't built any widgets.
Right.
Or you've only built 2 widgets and
Widget. Yeah.
and not very good widgets.
Well, in addressing performance, you know, if somebody is not performing well, or there's some element of their performance that's not going well, there may be legitimate reasons for that. You know, you haven't given me the resources to do it. I have part of the training, but you've added some new tasks, and I don't have training for that. I mean, that interaction, that monitoring of the performance is an opportunity to have a discussion that's two ways, you know, and you want to encourage that. I mean, that's really important. It's your performance and their performance. And by the way, you know, what do managers hate? They hate 360 evaluations in any organization. They hate it, yeah, because that leaves them open to feedback about how they're doing.
So let's talk about performance and accountability. Let's talk
Sure.
about how do we get the most out of our employees. I think we've had some really good direct feedback. How do we get the most out of our employees, and how do we develop them as managers?
Yeah, I've been part of both large organizations and smaller organizations, and you know, I've been. Here's something that's really important. I've been the CEO of a large hospital that had many outpatient clinics all over the state. And one of the things I found out as soon as I stepped into that job from day one, I was smarter, funnier, more engaging. That's the feedback I got from the employees. Everything I said was, oh, yeah, they were really paying attention, laughing, you know, fawning over me. Yeah. I mean, is that the truth about me? Was I suddenly better? Well, absolutely not. But the higher you are in any organization, the less likely you are to hear any truth about yourself. Does that make sense? Yeah. People are loath to tell you the truth. They're fearful. Sure. Yeah. And they don't have any more training about how to be clear and direct than the managers do. Yeah. So Employees have a little narcissistic injury when they hear the truth sometimes, just as managers do.
Mm.
But, and as you've heard me say many times, Randy, there's nothing like being in the here and now and knowing the truth. And hearing it gives you something that you can then negotiate. I mean, you can deal with it. And my truth may not be your truth, but it gives us some place to, we're talking about something. We're not avoiding something. And I guess that's the thing I keep saying over and over again is that a great deal of people who are out there managing people avoid difficult conversations. They just fundamentally do. Here's a wonderful example of that. So when I started with DuPont, one of the first calls I got, we had I'm in Wilmington, Delaware at the headquarters, and I get a call that there's a scientist who's over this research team in Troy, which is where all the DuPont paints are developed.
Mm.
And so this guy who's in charge of, I don't know, like 25 other scientists, has gotten on a plane there in Detroit and is talking about going to China, and he's just spinning off. So he's having a psychotic break. So I go there and, we get him off the plane, and then we get him admitted to a psychiatric facility where he could get some care. And then I started interviewing the employees, and guess what? This has been going on for 10 years. 10 years, and no one has addressed it. They just thought he was a little strange because every now and then he would twist off. Yeah. So he was bipolar, and he was manic. And every now and then he would just get a little, as they said, cray-cray.
A little wrapped around the axle.
Yeah, a little wrapped around the axle, and they would have to deal with it. And they didn't talk to anybody outside of their unit, but it was also known in other parts of the organization outside of this guy's team. So, I mean, I just think that's a wonderful example of, people making excuses. That's what we tend to do. Well, the reason their performance is because I know they're going through a divorce. I know their performance is suffering. Yeah, I should cut them a little slack or whatever. Yeah. We're not going to address it because it's just, who wants to talk to somebody who's wrapped around the edge? Well, here's another example. Somebody comes and says, I'm a manager. I've got this employee who has body odor that is off the charts. And people who work around this employee are greatly offended, and they're holding their nose, and I don't know what to do. So, well, the first thing I say is, that could be a medical issue. But it is something that affects the performance of the people who this guy works with. And so it's important to address it. And so we talk through about how to talk about it in a way that, will be either acceptable or it won't be acceptable, but it'll be the right thing to do. So does that make sense? Yeah.
I think it's just a way that there's you could be.
Well, being careful and being afraid are two different things. Yeah. So if you need to do something with an employee and you're anxious about it, there's always consultation that you can get. Yes. And the smaller the organization, the more difficult it is because everybody's in everybody else's business, right? Yeah, they are. Everybody knows everything about everybody. And
because we're a family.
We're a family, yeah, and we discuss everything. Oh, and by the way, we have a Christmas party where everybody, drinks and we talk about each other's stuff, and yeah. So those are the dangers of the smaller the organization, the more difficult it is to monitor and address employee behavior.
Well, let's talk about manager behavior.
Yeah, manager behavior. Yeah.
Let's talk about manager behavior because you've managed and trained hundreds, if not thousands, of managers.
I have.
You've taught
teaching
people
and
how to
training
manage.
managers how to manage. Yeah. So what about managers? What would you like to know about managers?
Well, what creates? You've covered a few things, and this is kind of off script here, but we've talked about evaluating. But what are
Writing
some
good job
things-
descriptions? That's really
Right.
important for a manager. If you don't know how to do that, then you can go to your HR department. Chances are there might be somebody there who might know how to do that, but chances are there isn't anybody there that knows how to write a good job description. But there are lots of examples online. That's the wonderful thing now about the internet. Anything that you need in terms of dealing with employees is out there. Forms, monitoring systems, job description, hints. Yeah. So that's important. It's also important as a manager to say, this is what I'm good at, and this isn't what I'm good at. And if you are honest with yourself, you can ask for feedback you can ask for feedback from your manager. You can ask for it from your employees. How am I doing in terms of this skill set or this skill set? Get feedback. And if you're honest with yourself, you can get all kinds of training and assistance, to be a better manager. But, when I look at most of the corporate management, the training programs.
Wow.
When I started at DuPont, I had a mentor assigned to me. I don't care how high you are in the organization, somebody gets assigned to you. And it's that way once you reach a certain level in most large corporations. And my mentor said the first day, welcome to this organization. He said, so here's your welcoming kit. Here's a knife for stabbing people in the back. And here's some lips for kissing ass. And he said, you can swap your knife for another set of lips, or you can swap your lips for another knife. It's up to you. But that's what it's going to take for you to make it in this organization. And I thought, so killing people, stabbing people in the back, kissing, that's kind of what you're saying?
So you've got to climb to the top of the heap by any means necessary.
Any means necessary, yeah.
Any means necessary.
Yeah. Because it's death for managers to say that we need help or this isn't working. You don't want to give the corporation feedback that a strategy or a plan that they said is necessary needs to be enacted.
It's managing out of fear.
This isn't working, but oh no, I'll just keep beating on the employees, to make them. And by the way, those strategies at corporations change all the time.
Well, in some of the things that you do, and we joked earlier about hostile takeovers.
Sure.
But you've had to do some company turnarounds.
Yes.
What's the first thing that you look at in a failing organization, or you've come in to there's a changing of the guard, if you will, a changing in top leadership. The board has voted out the CEO, and you've got to come in and sort of evaluate that company. What's the first thing that you look for in there?
Well, my experience is with behavioral health organizations, so
Right.
psychiatric hospitals, things like that. We're talking about, a particular kind of healthcare delivery. So the last turnaround I did was of a children's psychiatric hospital. There had been 2 patient deaths, 2 patient suicides. These were teenage girls who had killed themselves while they were in treatment. And the hospital had been closed down by Medicaid, the state health organization. Anyway, so there were a lot of people, a lot of organizational entities that did the right thing. They closed this place down and says, we don't know what's going on here, but they're supposed to be getting help, not killing themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I was hired to come in and look at what was going on. So my first response was, there isn't enough money to do this, number one. And number two, turn it into condos, because this is tough to come back from 2 patient suicides. But anyway, I took the job, and the first thing I discovered was, there were Joint Commission, of course, was involved, and the Joint Commission sets the standards for these kinds of organizations. So I looked at the report that had been produced by a Joint Commission, And then I just used that as sort of a template. There were a lot of physical changes that needed to occur in the organization. So these girls had hung themselves in their showers, and that should not be possible. So there are some physical things that you can do to make that impossible. And a lot of other things. We had to change the kind of beds, doors, locks, all kinds of stuff. Then the treatment model itself. This hospital used a kind of a punitive militaristic treatment model from like the 60s. There wasn't anything that was good about it. So I brought in a new director of nursing, trained all the staff in a new model of treating kids, hired a new psychiatrist who oversaw the facility, those kinds of things. And then I started looking at the books. So all this is in preparation to get the place open again.
Right.
And I looked at the books and discovered, well, a little Medicaid fraud had been going on. They'd been charging for things that hadn't occurred, overcharging. So I invited Medicaid in, and I said, let's go through the books together, and we did. And it was about a $250,000 hit. But we took the hit, and then I implemented a billing system that was open and honest and clear to anybody who might want to come in and take a look at it. So that meant I had to get rid of the CFO, who'd been primarily responsible for this, with the ex-CEO. So anyway, those kinds of changes. What made it really difficult was the overlay was that this was a union shop. So it's really hard to just fire people. And a lot of that hadn't gone on. People's performance hadn't been addressed.
Have you ever seen an organization that couldn't be turned around, that needed to fail, had gone too far?
Fortunately, I haven't been part of those, but I am aware of organizations, that have gotten so far down the road that the best thing for them is if we call in an airstrike.
You think bad leaders or bad employees, and why?
Well, I think there are people who come to the workplace having had certain kinds of lives, which lead them to perform in a certain way. So you might have people who take on a role and don't want to do it, have no intention of doing a good job, are looking to skate wherever they can. So that's sort of a stance that they brought with them. Is that a bad employee? I don't think that they're a bad person. I just think, they make a bad employee. Yeah, because their intention is not to do a good job. And they're not willing, by any stretch of the imagination, to learn or, do you see what I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Just like, we've talked about managers. People get promoted from something they do well, the Peter principle. They do something well and then they get promoted, and then the promotion takes them into an area of performance about which they're just lousy. They're just not very good. And again, does that mean that they're a bad person? It doesn't mean they're a bad person. It just means they're in a role for which they're unfit. Well, I've had to take over management positions in which I inherited employees who had not had their performance addressed. Like a guy sitting there with his cell phone looking at porn at work, that people can see when they're walking by. Well, that seems like to me it's a fairly obvious issue that needs to be addressed. So I've taken over positions as a manager where I had to address those, and I'm doing the work that somebody else has neglected. And I've taken over roles as a manager where the previous manager had been doing fantastic work. It's just like, man, this is great. This is fantastic. Yeah, it's easy to just slide in there.
I've got a couple more questions for you before we go.
I don't know if I answered that one very well, but
no, that's okay. I've loved all of your answers.
Just remember, I'm wrong so often that when I'm right, I'm amazed. So, and I'll own up to that.
It's often said, at this company we hire slowly and we fire quickly. is that a good strategy? When you've identified an employee, how do you make that decision? If you've been a poor manager and you're turning things around, but maybe your employees aren't digging it because you've been kind of a slouch your entire time, but now you're starting to turn things around. How do you make that switch? If you've got an employee that you know can't be saved and isn't buying in, how do you do that? Do you do it quickly? You rip off the Band-Aid?
Yeah, I mean, the question of can this employee be saved really has to do is the view worth the climb. You know, that's a monetary, that's a financial kind of consideration. Do I invest a certain amount of resources in getting this person turned around? In the meantime, especially if I'm a small organization, if they're not producing or doing what they were hired to do, that can have a big impact. So you really have to weigh, what do I need to do here? But again, another conversation that we've had, when you sit down with somebody like that, it's always good just to talk about what's really going on, which is, this is the environment that existed before, and this is the environment that exists now. Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
Okay, a couple of rapid fire questions.
Sure.
Quick questions, quick answers. Biggest lie that leaders tell themselves?
That I don't need to do anything different, and I know everything I need to know already.
What's one thing every CEO or top executive should stop doing?
Gosh, the list is so long.
Just one.
Just one. Not being able to relate to every position in the organization. I think that's the death knell.
Stop doing that.
Yeah, I think, you should spend at least one day in as often as you can, one day doing the job that someone in your organization is doing at the lowest level.
So I think that answers my last question is one thing they should start doing tomorrow.
Yeah.
Get to know their people.
Yeah.
Wow. That's some good stuff today, Bill. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
If you got value out of today's episode, share it with someone who needs to hear it, because the reality is that building a business is one thing, leading people is everything. This has been The Boss's Office, because it's lonely at the top and it doesn't have to be.